For those of you who didn't know Dave, okay, I'll just fill you in. Dave was a wonderful printmaker, and he was a regular participant in the Impressions Biennale, and his work won awards at Impressions in 2004-2012. He was born in Limerick in 1950, studied history in Trinity College, lithography at Scuola Istituto Statale d'Arte Urbino, and art and design at Limerick School of Art and Design. On leaving art school, he lived in the Netherlands for a few years before returning to Ireland in 1979. He taught for a few years in Limerick School of Art and Design before moving to the University of Limerick in 1983 until he retired from there in 2016. He was a member of Limerick Printmakers, an associate member of Cork Printmakers, and a trustee of the National South Portrait Collection. Together with artist and writer Jim Savage, he ran Occasional Press, which published art-based books. I'm quoting from Aidan Dunn a few years back. He says, Dave Lilburn habitually alludes to map making in his informal, highly personal accounts of place. His works are repositories of all sorts of information, topographical and anecdotal, in the form of representations, notes, calculations, collage and asides, compendious attempts to remember lost time. As many of you know, Dave was a general savage, but he always wore his learning lightly. From Joyce to jazz, from Proust to printmaking, from Beckett, I could go on, but I might run out of the alphabet. Which goes to show that a festival like this could never really do full justice to the range and diversity of his talents. So this evening we're going to celebrate Dave with film, music, talk, poetry and song. And our first item this evening is a film that was made back in 1994 by Mike O'Neill, a great friend of Dave's. And the film, Mike O'Neill unfortunately can't be here tonight, but Romany has asked the other Mike Byrne, who is a ceramic artist himself and has known Dave for 50 years. So I will pass you over to Mike, who's going to introduce the film.
Yes, Mike apologises for not being here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, he had a wedding to go to and just couldn't turn it down. The original version of this video was 30 minutes long. The one we're about to watch now is 20 minutes. Mike says that pieces were lost because the master VHS tape was damaged due to time and storage conditions. And when it was being edited, the quality would deteriorate with each copy. And I also think that the switch from analog to digital had some damaging effect on it. And Mike apologises for this. It's not as good as what you could do on your phone nowadays, but it's a very nice film. The film was made in 1994-95. Dave had wanted it to run during a planned exhibition. We can't work out exactly what exhibition or when exactly it was, but it doesn't matter because the film never got finished or shown. But he felt it would give the attendees at the exhibition an idea of how his work was made. Mike says it was never really intended to be viewed as a standalone piece, but more in this context, with the work all around us. And this is the first public viewing of it, so we're very privileged. Dave and Mike had a rough plan of action worked out before they started. The film was made over 2 days. Day 1 in the print studio in Mary Immaculate College, and day 2 on location around the city, with particular emphasis on the river and the area where the Lilburns live. You will notice in the film, particularly the sounds of scraping and scratching of the tools that, while Dave was working. He was particularly interested in getting these sounds of his work across, as it essentially was the soundtrack to his process. This is what he heard and responded to as he worked alone. In fact, he told me that he could tell sometimes how true a line or a mark could be by the sound it made when he was drawing on the plate. Dave's interest in the craft of printmaking comes across really well, as he explains everything in great detail as he works. Mike says that none of this was scripted or rehearsed. Dave just talked, and it came across in the most relaxed and informative way. There are also some insights into how he taught, how he gathered his research in his little sketchbooks, and how these little marks became aligned with geography, history, both personal and national, and all kinds of odd fragments and ideas that he had. And they all came together in the finished work. The first voice you hear is Dr. Owen Devereux, and speaking words written by the art critic from the Irish Times, we think. It's a very interesting little film, and it's also nice to see some snatches of Limerick of nearly 30 years ago. Enjoy. Thank you.
So next person I'm going to ask to talk is a poet, well-known poet and author, Ciaran O'Driscoll. So Ciaran lives in Limerick, and he has worked as a lecturer in the School of Art and Design and the Limerick Institute of Technology. He's a member of Aosdána, and he has published 10 books of poetry. His latest one is Angel Hour, which came out, I think, last August, I think. And that's his most recent book. Also, he wrote a wonderful childhood memoir, which is a great title of Runner Amongst Fallen Leaves. And also, he has a novel, Year's Midnight, which was published by Pigpog Press in 2012. So, Ciaran, over to you.
Yeah, Dave was one of the first people to befriend me when I arrived in Limerick in 1986, along with Mike there and Mike and others. My memory fails me sometimes now. And through his friendship, we collaborated in many ways over the years. It has already been said twice, I think, that the theme of mapping strongly features in Dave's work. Also the whole idea of a journey. So therefore the very first collaboration that I did with him was that I wrote a poem called Lions Odyssey as my first response to one of his prints it was published in his exhibition catalogue, Poem Ground, and later in drawn texts edited by Judith Savage. I saw Dave's monoprints as a kind of autobiographical atlas relating to his house home and environment, Romilly's pregnancy and the birth of Casper. I had a few lines in that poem about marks that are shape-shifting in their elemental permanence, to become a swollen stream, trees in the circle of seas and dotland, to feed the wild strength of marsh grass or cut cranes down to size, fatten to pregnancy, midwife birth, equal to anything on earth. It's like a kind of a creative thing, as if Dave was recreating the world in a way, in his art. I collaborated with another exhibition, The Usurper's Habit, by writing a poem for the catalogue. And also, this one, which is hard to see for many people, but you can come up and look at it afterwards. This was for the centenary of the birth of Patrick Kavanagh. It was commissioned by the Kavanagh Institute up in County Monaghan, in Carrickmacross and in Eskeen. So, whereas I had already seen the work when I was responding to Lions Odyssey, when I was responding to Home Ground, in this case I was the one that wrote the poem, and Dave responded to the poem. The poem is called Stony Grey Owl. I originally had the idea, myself and Dave were socially connected, and we had parties in both our houses, and we often had a pint together. and we discuss things or ideas, and the things that I'm talking about, the collaborations, very often arose out of just chatting and having too many pints. But he also designed the Limerick Poetry broadsheet during my editorship of same. And we worked together more recently, quite recently, within the last 10 years, on a Limerick themed project for an issue of Cypher's Poetry magazine. And Cypher's Poetry magazine reproduced a copy of his magnificent Footprint of the Celtic Tiger, which some of you may be familiar with. He also designed covers for 3 of my collections of poetry. The first one was called Gog and Magog, which Dave did the cover of, and an interesting thing was it was launched in Galway, and the cover was still wet when it arrived at the launch. So many people have first editions that have fingerprints. My favourite of Dave's is this cover for a book based on a year me and my family spent in Italy, and it's called The Old Women of Magione. And this arose from some sketches he made when he visited us during the year we spent in Umbria. We talked about the idea of a series of poems and drawings based on the landscape of a place called Lagoga, which was a valley near the town of Magione in Italy. The valley where we lived in a converted farmhouse near the town. One of these sketches, which we called Study for Basil, Lagoga series, now hangs in the hall of our house. Unfortunately, the series was never finished. The only thing that I'm aware of, and there may be others, but the only thing is that we have a framed copy in the hall of our house of an elongated, highly evocative drawing which arose from the kind of walking drawing that Dave does. You know, we were walking from the farmhouse. He came over for a festival, and he stayed in our farmhouse. And we were walking from the farmhouse to the town of Magione, and he had his little notebook, and he was sketching away, you know. And the culmination of that, he sent us this print, and I just find it still so evocative. What I wanted to say was that he included some of that print in the cover of this book. I'm sorry, you can come and look at it afterwards, I leave it on the table here. But some of the typical markings of Dave, you know, the kind of energetic, dynamic markings, sketching suddenly something recognisable, and then beside it something totally unrecognisable, just a line of energy or something like that, you know. You have olive groves, an olive grove here. You have lines which are clearly a vineyard, and then there's outhouses of a farm. And on top of it all, Giotto's mourning angels, you know. And then around the corner, you've got, from another classical medieval masterpiece. A hill town, an Umbrian hill town. And then, lo and behold, going around the corner here, there's a queue of friars with halos on their heads. Yeah. And it is just a wonderful, I think it's a wonderful cover that he did for that, and I'm so grateful for it. Even Frank O'Mahony said, that's a fine product. Lovely product, I think he said. Yeah, Dave researched his work very carefully. After all, he had studied history before he studied art. So, to explicate the print on the easel, we've got to get to the print on the easel. In my poem, the title, of course, is a pun on stony grey soil of Monaghan, the stony grey owl of Monaghan. There's an owl, as Patrick have there along the border, and an actual drawing of an actual owl there. Anyway, you can have a look at that at your leisure. Right, I'll just read Stony Grey Owl and make a last remark or two about my collaborations with Dave. Stony Grey Owl. There's an owl in Billy Brennan's barn tonight instead of dancers. A stony grey owl roosting in the library of its rafters. They say the bird was once a farmer poet who wrote strong words on sexual frustration in small holdings, knocked music out of rocky wind-grown fields, cracked open the universal on unpromising hillsides. Later he abandoned the home place for the sake of his muse, who couldn't live without a crack at fame. As a result, he met with even greater poverty, mendicant, love-crossed, prolific but marginal in the literary city, the anger of his humiliation swelling almost to engulf his sanity. He was always rescued at the last minute by the light within. A bolt of pure poetry affirmed his calling and dispelled the shame. And so he struggled on, discovering places that he loved in the city. A seat by the canal as water spilled through a lock was his Niagara Falls. The gravelled yard of a chest hospital became his adventure holiday, and sun traps were the warm countries he lived in to recuperate. This poet farmer who departed the parish of his birth's geography, and in the end abandoned ward and townland for the movable parish of poetry, leaving as his inheritance the light that can transfigure every place. This stony grey owl of Monaghan, now roosting in the bookshop of the dark, refulgence shut inside its beak. Finally, I remember a walk we took together from the farmhouse. I've already mentioned that. And Dave was working at his walking drawing, as he called it. He was animated, full of enthusiasm, and interspersing our conversation with remarks like, this is excellent, splendid, as he jotted down another observed detail, our code of marks and lines in his notebook. This, I think, will be my abiding memory of David Lilburn, the two of us walking together on that Strada Bianca, white road, the road of what Dave liked to call low-key projects, the road of art and friendship. And now we have Margaret Farrelly, my wife, who is going to give us a slow air called Chiffon Mavura. Sorry? Chiffon Mavura means the reason for my sorrow. It's about a man who can't, is not allowed to make his way to his loved one because the father forbids it. No, which way should I move?
the wonderful print that Ciaran was talking about here has its own story, in that a couple of weeks ago Ciaran found it after doing a little bit of research up in Monaghan. So he made a trip up, and it was pure coincidence that he actually did find it and bring it back. So that was, great, another lovely coincidence that amongst others along the way. So this evening we're sitting here in this lovely room surrounded by the works of Dave. All of them have been either bought by his friends or gifted to his friends. And so effectively they form a very eclectic kind of collection. And if we were to think about it, I suppose the one curative glue that there is friendship. But to give coherence to this collection, there's no better person than Judith Hill, architect, architectural historian, writer, amongst whose books are The Building of Limerick and Lady Gregory Alive. So would you please welcome Judith Hill.
First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to give this talk, and I'm delighted to do it, though I do feel I'm no more eligible to do this than many people here who've known and loved Dave's works for the 30 years or so that he was exhibiting. So, and also what follows really only barely scratches the surface, which, here we go. So this, first of all, this is City of Culture 3. And of course you could look at any of the images around as well, particularly these ones you can see at the back. Now this is a dry point that Dave made in 2014. And here is Dave's hand that we all recognise. There is the impression that it was drawn quickly with vigour and concentration. There are the apparently approximate speculative lines that exude energy, whether they're strong and straight or lightly inscribed and curved, like the trajectory of a bird. Your eye is drawn to the many centres of interest, gaping doorways, a ship in full sail, a pit bull terrier straining up the leash, 4 men talking at the bottom. And you may recognise some of the objects. Of course, this is Limerick, the Treaty Stone, St Mary's Cathedral, the Strand Barracks. There are patches of subdued colour. There is the jumble of varied scales. And if you go closer, there's dotted areas, stripling, labels, dates and boxes containing icons and emblems. It is part map, part prospect, part sketchbook anecdote, animated by that sense of energy. The scene, we might sum it up in this way, seems to have come together for a single miraculous moment, and we might expect that it will vanish as quickly and completely. With this, Dave has captured the essence of our lives, contingent, ephemeral, but so real in the living. Dave created an artistic language, what would be called a voice in the world of books. It is individual, contemporary, and bursting with things to say. How did he do it? And is the connection between the personality of the artist, who we can so easily imagine drawing with vigour and concentration, and the expression of his work as close as they seem? These are the 2 questions I want to think about in the next few minutes. So, first of all, becoming an artist. And this is just a collage of Limerick images. There's a card at on the right-hand side, and then the other 2 images are from a map of a garrison town. So first, how did Dave become an artist? He wasn't born into a family of artists in a cosmopolitan city. Instead, he grew up in a Protestant family with strong ties to the Presbyterian Church in 1950s Limerick. That there was pressure to conform is suggested by Dave's observation made to the art critic Brian McAvera, that he was glad that he wasn't born in pre-independence Limerick, dominated by a Scottish garrison. I feel lucky, he said, that I would easily be able to break away from that worldview. Then there was secondary school at the Quaker-run Newtown in Waterford. This gave him a liberal education and encounters with contemporary art in Dublin, especially the 1967 Rosk exhibition, where he saw the work of Pierre Aleksandrsky and the Spanish artist Antoni Tapies. Then comes the part of people's lives when they try to find their way. And in Dave's case, he had an interest in art, but was prepared to follow his father to Trinity College, where he studied history and political science. Even so, In his last summer at university, he went to Urbino, as we've heard, in Italy, to learn the printing technique of lithography, and of course to travel. And here again, he encountered the Prince of Aleszensky, who represented Belgium in the 1972 Venice Biennale, and also Henry Moore's etchings in Florence, which he, again, to Brian Macavera, he said, these were too loose for the prof in Florence. He said, but I thought they were wonderful. Dave would continue to be drawn to the work of continental artists for whom printmaking was central. In Amsterdam, in the late 70s, he saw the work of Anton Heiber, and I'm quoting him, he says, enormous dry points, big dry points, scratched into rough zinc, gutsy, maybe 6 foot high, wonderful stuff. In 1988, he saw an exhibition of the work of the Russian artist Oleg Kruzhyashkov in the Douglas Hyde Gallery. And these artists introduced him to printmakers with ambition, working with concentrated expression and often at a large scale. Dave navigated the next few years armed with his interest in art, his desire to produce art, an open mind, and a healthy dose of pragmatism. A few months in London, a stint as a model at Limerick School of Art, where he found printmaker Dietrich Blodau, who taught him how to use an etching press and encouraged him to apply to the new diploma course in art at the school. Dave emerged in 1977 with a qualification in both graphic design and printmaking. He was on the road. 2 years in the Netherlands, earning money as a graphic designer and experimenting with print. And when he returned to Ireland in 1979 with Romany, he accepted a part-time job at Limerick School of Art. As he told Macavera, that's when I really got my working methods sorted out. I was teaching simple printmaking with the first years. I started making monoprints myself. This led on to a very productive period. By 1983, this life was consolidated when he got a full-time job as a graphic designer in NIHE, which later became the University of Limerick, and he was free to pursue his art without the need to make a living from it. So that is how he became an artist in a practical sense. Dave had his first one-man show in 1991, Home Ground. He was 41, and what had he done? And in fact, this print also from Brian Grant is probably better to look at that than the photograph of the reproduction. So this one here, anyway, is called Round the Front. And here again are those animated lines. And his friend and fellow artist, Jim Savage, who is a connoisseur of drawing, wrote a very perceptive essay in the catalogue where he describes Dave's lines. The drawings are done quickly, taking risks, trusting to first responses, he wrote. And he also wrote, the lines are still sprung with the energy that put them down. Jim notices the trace of a hand that is mobile and free, spontaneously inventive and improvisational, moving in a fluid, reactive response to the lived world of experience. Jim presents artist and art as indivisible. The same figure that observed and responded is found in each individual line and in the whole effect of ramshackle life. Dave had produced monoprints, and as Jim put it, a sheet of glass is inked up with a thin layer of printing. So we've seen Dave doing the dry point, but this is another technique that he was using a lot, particularly at the beginning. Then a sheet of white paper is placed on top of it. Now the ink, of course, is very thick, and the paper doesn't absorb the ink. And it's only by drawing a line with a pencil or a crayon on the back of the paper that the face of the paper is then pressed into the ink, which picks it up. Thus, when the drawing is complete and the paper is peeled off the ink place, the drawn line on one side of the paper is transformed into the printed one on the other. You can also make an imprint with your hand and produce a more painterly image, and you can see that in that little card at the top. Or you can add patches of colour to a drawn monoprint. It really is the nearest a printing process can come to a drawing. And Jim was clear that the impulse behind Dave's monoprints was the impulse to draw rather than print. It was a printing technique that allowed him to transmit his response to his surroundings as directly as possible onto the sheet. And here I have another one, After Breakfast. And here is that sense of living, with a stronger sense of the autobiographical, though in this scene and others, the people themselves are absent. So apart from the character and quality of the inscribed lines, Dave used other means to give immediacy to the scene and to alert the viewer that this was mediated through his perceptions. So, for example, there's more than one clear focus in this print, and the eye is pulled around the scene. And he also evokes a kind of elastic space, moving objects, and you can see that above the house, for example, taking liberties with perspective. And these tendencies direct your response in this print, which is called Streetwalker. And here we're down in the docks at Limerick. This is also from home ground. And we can see we're beguiled, if you like, by ranks, grains, silos, the gasworks, telegraph posts, wires, trucks. We're bamboozled by a confusion of perspectives and vistas. The art critic, Aidan Dunn, saw this element in Dave's work as the impulse to record what he called mental maps. And this is a term used by geographers to describe the bringing together of different classes of information and memory, the summation of accumulated knowledge of our immediate world. And this idea of maps I'll return to later. Now, the home ground monoprints tells us that Dave was already using many registers of that voice that will become familiar. But they don't really tell us how he did it. And the clue, of course, to this lies in his walking drawings. In 2009, Dave published a book containing sketchbooks and related prints. It was a commission from Ballynahinch Castle in County Galway, one of several given to contemporary artists invited to spend creative time in the vicinity of the castle and to publish their work. Dave chose to reveal his working method. As he told Brian McAvera, "I love walking, especially through the landscape of the west of Ireland, and I love to draw. I got into the habit of drawing while I was walking," which you heard about. When drawing, you can look at what you're interested in and ignore the rest. It's also a way of keeping a mental note of what captures your imagination. The method suits my personality. I prefer to be moving on rather than sitting on one spot. "How do you see your relationship to language?" McAvera asked Dave. Dave's immersion in landscape recalled the artist Richard Long to McAvera, who might, McAvera suggested, be described as an imperialist. Presumably, he meant that Long dominated the places he was in and extracted what he found. I think a closer analogy with Dave's work is suggested by the nature writer Richard Leiby, who was when he was writing about the poet William Cooper, another artist who was inspired by the act of walking. Leiby wrote that Cooper's poem, The Task, offers scenes, observations, reflections exactly as they might be encountered on a walk. And this is Leiby's words here. "Scale and perspectives are repeatedly shifting, so that one moment a wild flower is in focus, the next a whole cycle of work in a different field." Was Cooper here close to a different view of walking, Leiby asks. A glimpse of it not as a ritual of perambulation, a way of taking possession of the landscape, but as an opportunity for the landscape to take possession of you. Dave seems to be addressing the challenge that if you don't adopt a traditional view, looking along a path, for example, and if the landscape you're looking across seems essentially featureless, how do you represent it? So the dry point print below is a sort of daring answer really to that problem, for here is a large image of a featureless landscape where a staccato rhythm, vertical rhythm of burnt trees at the back along the horizon, which is quite close to us, it acts as a sort of counterpart to the mass of detail in the foreground, where you can get lost in the texture and chaos. So although it's representing formlessness, Dave finds sufficient visual order through a chromatic use of line weight and type, from lightly inscribed and fine to heavy and dark lines. And there's also a strong dose of minimalism here, and a sort of landscape that's been notated. So walking drawing tells us a bit about the primacy of perceptions for Dave. It reveals a strong correlation between Dave's physical preferences and his method of working, and it presents a method of working that enables him to extract essential things related to image making and the forms that he wants to depict. So these sketches are the vocabulary and grammar, really, of his particular artistic language. I just want to talk a little minute here about his self-portraits. And there's, the first one here is from 1983, it's a monoprint. The second one is also a monoprint from 1986. The third one is a monoprint, is a dry point, and that one is in the National Self-Portrait Collection, and that's from 1989. And then the one at the bottom was from 1998, and it was the first page of Paradisi Portae Parasai Sunt, The Gates of Paradise Are Closed, which is an artist's book that he exhibited in 1998. I just want to briefly consider these self-portraits. And self-portraits, as you can see from the different dates, it's an occasional series that he makes intermittently throughout his life. And what is most striking is how, as a group, they're different from his other prints. Even taking into account that a self-portrait is about self-scrutiny, the quality of focus is very strong. It is almost as though they were studies in concentration, that this is their subject. The head and maybe the upper body takes up the page. The eyes look directly at the mirror or viewer, and these eyes are the focus. And Dave's used his glasses as a framing device to accentuate their presence. The posture and expression are all given up to the effort of concentration and inspection, and in two of them we can see him actively drawing. One even provides us with the studio surroundings. He's wearing an overall and drawings are pegged up behind him, the first one there. So these prints are also surprisingly solid. There are areas of intense concentration of lines, and there is a clear delineation of shapes. Even the most sketchy, that second one, 1986, gives a very clear account of the outlines of his face in particular. So what do they reveal? On his website, Dave quotes David Hockney on self-portrait. He wrote, "Ultimately, it is about identity, who we are, where we are, not a formal matter." End quote. Dave's images are of himself as an artist practicing his craft, I think in the act not of making a print, but in the act of drawing. In a sense, they are embodiments of the concentration that is behind the energy, direction, curiosity and ebullience of his art. Having seen his self-portraits, we can never look at his prints in quite the same way again, for now we know we are looking with the person who was there first and looked with such fierce intensity and purpose. So then maps. And this is Pandemonium by George Brooks. So maps became a central part of Dave's work. And in the early years of the 21st century, he would receive a number of prestigious commissions which involved the making of maps. Dave described his return to Limerick in 1989 as the catalyst for his map making. And I'm quoting him here now. "I think it probably started when I returned to live in Limerick City. Up to that, for years, I've been living in the country and a lot of my work was about landscape. When I returned to Limerick, the place I grew up in and went to art school in, I began to get the urge to add stories, events from my own past, to mark sites that had historical significance, and to mark routes through the city which I followed. You can load all sorts of information and meaning onto a map." So the map became associated with the city which he knew inside out, as it were. How did he assimilate this into his art? He told Byrne, "You mentioned Limerick being a provincial city. In many ways it still is, but for me, in another way, it became a metaphor for the city in general. So I wanted to find a way of expressing all the activity that went on, in the one image. I love the way George Gross describes the city, Berlin, in the early 20th century. In Pandemonium, for example, a wonderful drawing, packed with detail, murders, crashes, dogs kissing, religious groups parading with banners. I never get tired of it." So here we have The Kings Are Out, which was done printed in 2013. So for Dave, mapping is a way of incorporating a wide variety of experiences and memories into a single image, by presenting them in a spatial relationship to each other. A map, he wrote, can be thought of as a multi-layered, coded narrative which can represent thoughts, ideas and stories accumulated over time. There is something inherently subversive about this because maps are usually presented as objective accounts of a particular measured moment. From this they derive their authority and they have been used as instruments of power. In fact, as Dave was so acutely aware, places represented on maps have accumulated over a long period of time, and they are not objective, for certain features have been selected for representation. This is what Dave exploits and uses to transmit his personal experience of the world. We mentioned that in the Home Ground exhibition of 1991, Aidan Dunn had noticed that the images contained the semblance of mental maps, bringing together different types of knowledge and information. In a prospect of Limerick, which you see here, exhibited as part of the exhibition The Usurper's Habit in 1998, Dave now maps Limerick by reordering the city according to his own criteria, using large scale to accentuate, for example, the castle at the far side there, or layering it with historical references to the 17th century sieges and the penal laws of the 18th century. He uses plans and you can see the fort on the right, and roughly constructed perspective, and the bridge in the centre there, with its 3 streams of water, is a central image. And he uses marks. There's a cross, there's an orange sawtooth, which is quite prominent, and there's lettering as well. And at the centre, almost lost in the confusion of detail, is a fragment of self-portrait, his spectacled eyes staring straight at the viewer, as though the whole image is in fact a portrait of himself that he is observing in the mirror. It is a direct portrayal of the fact that his maps are expressions of his. In the year 2000, Dave received the first commission that harnessed his ability to layer information in a single image. It was for what's called an artist's map, and came from the Department of Foreign Affairs and the OPW for the Irish Pavilion at the World Exposition Expo 2000 in Hanover. The themes of the Irish Pavilion were history, culture and landscape. Coastline is a dry point print which takes a traditional map as its starting point, and on this side here you can see the whole thing, but it's really difficult to see any of the details, so I've blown up, they have its coastline, and then on there are 2 borders, and on the top you can see the border which is essentially a profile of the landscape facing the sea, and there's a strong emphasis on the weather in that. And then there's this, and then beyond that there's the second border, which is the outer border, and that's the zone where he really explores the themes of coastline with icons, images, words, signs, and text. And there's a boat here which is maintaining the connections between Ireland and Wales. And at the entrance to the sweeping entry is a notice, and it says 2000, no refugees here. And then on the other side there you can see he also, behind the coastline here is England, and these images of military aggression that have been directed at Ireland over the centuries. So we've got an archer, and there's some cannon, and there's gunners as well. And then he's putting himself into the picture. The Mull of Kintyre and Scottish emigration to Ireland includes the name Lilburn in Kintyre, and below it you can see the artist's hand emerging from the silt. And I don't know if I did. Yes, here, 1798, on the Mayo coast, there's a reference to the revolution, French Revolution, and also the arrival of the French. So the other map commission I want to just briefly mention is in media res. So in 2007, Dave was commissioned by the National Library of Ireland to produce a map to feature James Joyce's Ulysses as part of an exhibition celebrating James Joyce and Bloomsday. His map was entitled In Media Res, in the middle of things, and it was 7 intaglio dry point prints which together form a map of a large part of the areas of Dublin which feature in Ulysses. The idea was for a visualisation of the book, Ulysses, that would be intelligible to experts and to those who've never read Joyce, which are tall order. Dave read the book carefully and wrote, I wanted to make the work Joycean in the sense that it would be packed with information, some of it overt, more of it hidden. Also, just as Joyce parodied different styles of writing, I tried to parody different visual styles and conventions. The cartographic framework for this map has 2 layers, and as Catherine Flynn pointed out last autumn in her lecture at the Huntington Library, California, to mark the centenary of the publication of Ulysses, this is a map where the streets hold their shape by and large. And you can see that, so that's, on this side here, there's just one of the prints, and you can see it's around Nelson's column, and I've blown that up on the map there. So that's a bit, and the second framework is Dave's mental map. And he again took a sketchbook through Dublin, and he recorded what he saw as he walked, so that he was able to inscribe his own roots and perceptions onto the visual representation of the map. So onto this framework, Dave inserted representations of buildings, scene fragments, characters, conversations, anecdotes from Ulysses, and a cornucopia of references to places, historical events, classical allusions that were mentioned or implicit in the novel. The informality of Dave's hand is everywhere present. Buildings distorted but recognisable, some items expanded, others diminished, people, animals and objects engulfed in their own worlds and oblivious to the lines of the street. And just 2 examples here. So we saw the GPO, Nelson's Pillar. Actually, the Nelson's Pillar, and also he puts in the Spike, the modern one. And I like the Statue of Larkin as well. And there's the Parnell Monument. There's also a little portrait of Parnell inside, framed by an ivy leaf. And then here, just an example of one of the scenes. So there you can see is Davy's pub, where Bloom had his lunch in one of the episodes of Ulysses. And you can see here the whole lunch thing taking up the entire block, city block there. Lovely. Now, just finally, landscape. And it's not much, it's a big subject. I just want to touch on some of Dave's landscapes. Now, landscape was very important for Dave, and he was preoccupied with it as an artistic theme, or challenge, maybe, or a form of self-expression throughout his life. His landscapes are often constructed in the studio using his sketchbook, drawings, memories, and his understanding of the place. Now, this landscape here is called Here I Am and Here I Stay, and it's from the walking drawing book. And in this landscape, Dave encompasses the landscape as like a map maker and a topographer and an artist rolled into one. And there are probably, maybe this one here, there's a bit of that in there, in that print as well, and you might find others around. So there's in these prints, the form of the mountains, the poetry of their outlines, and there's their grandeur, but there's also a hint of their geological formation and their place in the whole range of the mountains. And there's notes also almost really of the texture of the terrain. And in the little inset, the drawing at the top there, you can't see this, but he's drawn his dog. He's with his dog on this page. And also, you can see there's also a little fragment of an OS map, which often he would put on, which Romy tells me was often used to pinpoint the location of the drawing. And so then finally, in these sketches from Walking Drawing, you can see him exploring the shape of the mountain ranges, the outlines. You can see him also looking at the massing of the mountains and the rocky surfaces. And then here, two wonderful prints. He's translated his knowledge of the fall of the mountains in the coastal landscape as well, together with his feeling for the texture, the grandeur, the presence and character of the landscape, into highly expressive dry point lines. The knowledge, understanding, personal response, it's all there in each line. It's a long way from the frenetic activity of the prospect of Limerick, but it's clearly Dave's work in his hand. How does he do it?
There certainly are an abundance of poets here in the room, and tonight, finally, okay, I will introduce you to Tony Curtis. Tony, as I mentioned already, worked with Dave on a couple of books. One was Pony, which was actually launched at the Limerick Literary Festival back in 2014. And for which Dave did drawings and paintings, and the other was the book This Flight Tonight, which was on Alcott and Brown, which is a beautiful book, of which Dave did the cover of. So Tony is from Dublin and is studied in Trinity College and has published 10 warmly received collections of poetry. He has been awarded the Broome House Exchange Fellowship to Australia, the Irish National Poetry Prize, and in 2018 he received the Lawrence O'Shaughnessy Prize for Poetry at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. I think I got those sayings in the right way. So Tony has read poetry to great acclaim all over the world. So would you please welcome Tony, please.
Guitar, because my mother says if you're going to read to a mixed audience, bring the guitar. Not everybody likes poetry. Some people are dragged along. So that's what and I'm just going to read 3 old poems and 2 new poems. And I'll show you. I just want to say I'm delighted, Romany, I'm delighted to be here.
I'm delighted you're here.
I'm delighted to be here. And I want to thank the Commission, everybody involved. And I'm delighted that here today we have Hugh is here, Dave's brother, and his brother Gary, and his sons Jonathan and Casper. And I knew Dave for about 20 years. Oh, the other thing I just want to say to the Commission, people think this just happens by accident. The organisation that went into making this, when you think of the week and how they planned it, they started it last Monday with Yeats' birthday, 13th of June. 14th, 15th of June, Alcock and Brown's flight from Newfoundland to Ireland. The 16th of June, Bloomsday, which we've seen there, Judith, Judith, that Dave was central to that book's fame. And then the Caterbrine Festival yesterday, and still one of my favourite writers. And here this year they're doing Pray for the Wanderer. Not our best book, but well worth rereading. And today we have the Dave Lilburn Festival. And I am delighted to be closing it. So I knew Dave for about 20 years. And I met him first in Allihies. Myself, Paul Meehan and Theodore used to go to Allihies, and they used to bring students from America, from Penn State and Seattle University over to be introduced to us and to be introduced to Allihies. It was extraordinary. The students would come, from America. It was a completely different country then. This is Twitter and Twitter and Trump. This was right. And they used to come over and they'd go into Jimmy's pub and they'd say to Jimmy, "What time do you close?" And he'd say, "Sometime in October." This was the thing. And so I'd work with my pencil, and Paul and me would work, and Theodore would work with our pencils on the students' heads. But some years they had an artistic bent, and Dave Lilburn was brought in, and what Dave brought was extraordinary. Because when we were making poems, it was just occasional dust rising. But when Dave came, it was like whirlwind. The place became a Chinese laundry. Because they made all these prints and then hung them all up to dry. And the students were delighted. There was no more head-wrecking words. It was just, you could paint and tap, and they loved it. And they loved him. He had this amazing quality Dave had. He was like a cross between a Buddhist, a monk, Paul Clee, and one of them people Judith mentioned. And all the clever things that Jim Savage said about Dave, how he worked, Judith. All the clever things he said about, Jim Savage said about Dave, how quickly he worked, how quirky he was. Well, all those things apply to me too. And I think that's why I got on so well with him. What happened, so we worked like that. We were just like leaves on a tree, on different sides of the tree. And then one day fate threw us together. And what happened was, in 2012 I published a book called Folk. And I started writing about animals because I met this great American sculptor called Philip McCracken. And he taught me that you could talk to animals. They're actually more interesting than people, sometimes. And so they put me together with Joe Wilson, a great friend of theirs, a great photographer, great printmaker. And so we started to do this book called Pony, right? Myself and Joe. But once Joe made a few photographs and they were put with my poems, they quickly realised that my head and Joe's head were incompatible. Right? Joe saw the world this way, and I saw the world this way. And so then I think Dave Lilburn realised that where Joe saw the world that way, me and him saw the world that way. So I just do the first poem that I wrote in response to one of Joe's photographs. And there's a photograph, beautiful photograph of a pony. But Dave ended up doing this painting for it. And what happened was Dave read this poem, but then the Ennis Book Festival, which took place in the old Ground Hotel, where I'm now staying. I was out back after 10 years. Dave sat in the audience and heard me reading these pony poems. And it was really fun because at the end, what he said to me was great. I said, well, there they are, Dave. I made all these, they're probably more bendy than you had expected. And he said, don't worry, Tony, I'll make bendy paintings. And he's a great man to work with. I loved working with him because he'd say things like, I made 3 paintings. Which one do you think is the best? And I go, you know, to choose one. And he'd go, yes, that's right, this is the best. So he did all the art and I did all the words. And that's why Jim Savage was so important. Because Jim and Dave they were a great team together. And what was missing today, I thought, and the one thing that was missing is that the two of them were perfectionists. Down to the paper. Like I had a long conversation with Jim and Dave about the paper. I never thought about the paper. But they were saying to me, the paper for the book is so fine, they didn't even leave a sample. Just in case I didn't like it. So, this is called After 7 Photographic Portraits of a Grey Connemara Pony. And this poem was written just so that the school children in Dublin would know the difference between a Connemara pony and a horse. They are entirely different creatures. I still believe that when your man came back from Chinlow, Machine, but when he came back out of Chinlow, he was going along on the Connemara pony, and a man said to him, lovely horse, boss. And he had to get off the horse to hit him, and he turned into this old man. So this is it. You will know a pony by its ears, listening out for weather forecasts and love songs, by its mane, tossed over its eyes like a witch's broom, by its coat, always buttoned up, tight-fitting, dusty, well-worn, by its eyes that look at you, then look at you again to take you in, by its hooves, made for dancing and so worn at the tips, by its mouth, it loves to eat words given with pats of the hand, by its nose that knows you and lifts the pony's head to let it know you're coming, by its tail that conducts the symphony of bird song, lake song, light song. There's the bog underfoot here above the village of Roundstone. I'll just show you this. This is the book. This Flight Tonight. Anybody of a certain age will know where the title comes from. It's track 7 on a fantastic album, Joni Mitchell, Blue. Turn this crazy bird around. I shouldn't have got on this flight tonight. And I just want to show you one thing. That when I did this book, I did a poem for children about Alcock and Brown. And Dave, he didn't do it, he just put the poem on the page. And this is just one boy flying a kite. But it obviously didn't make a big impression on Dave. And I made one change. And it's the last poem I ever gave to Dave. And I made one change. And the one change was, I started with one boy, and having written 300 pages, I decided there's Alcock and Brown. There's 2 boys. John Alcock was 26, and he was from Manchester, Old Trafford. And the navigator, Arthur Whitten Brown, he was 32, and he was from Glasgow. And she said to me, I always thought they were Americans. So I said to her, Margaret, you're the cleverest woman in Ireland, and you think they're from America. What do the stupid people think? So I went into the school in community college in Clifton, and I said to the kids, you know you live with the Alcock Brown Museum, the Alcock Brown statue, the Alcock Brown Hotel, the Alcock Brown statues, and everything. Where were they from? And all the kids shouted out, Newfoundland! I said, no. New York! New Mexico! New Orleans, all this stuff. And then eventually somebody said, New Ross! You're the closest. So the next morning in Swell's Hotel, having breakfast with my great friend Michael Cody, I wrote this poem. I haven't got it with me, so I'll try and say it. And it's because of this poem I wrote this book. Right? So it goes like this. And then there is the story of the two aviators who landed outside Clifton. But I don't really know it. I just know they were British. One from Old Trafford, the other from Glasgow. And their names were John Alcock and Arthur Whitten Brown. And they were either very brave or very foolish. For the way I heard it, they boarded a kite, attached to a garden shed, attached to two Rolls-Royce engines, and then hurled themselves into the wind. And not having a bird's sense, they had to fly their crate through the mouth of St. John's Harbour to be sure they were heading east. They say it took them 16 hours and 27 minutes to cross 1,980 miles of ocean. And in the frozen night mist, Alcock was often unsure which way was up. And Arthur Whitten Brown repeatedly crawled out onto the wings to chip ice off the engines. But I'd say that was nothing to men who just come out of the Great War. 4 years flying over no man's land. So the bright side was, no one was firing at them. I'd say they just held on to the wings and sang. Isn't that what the British do? So here we go. On that clear blue morning, as they swept in off the Atlantic over the wild-tossed bed of Erisland, I wonder what they were thinking. Or was it all just tears? 4 years of sorrow released by the beauty of Ballyconneely and Inishbofin, by the soft breasts and belly of the mountain, reaching out to feather them down. Whoa. Historians in the room. That was written over breakfast, and I spent the next while trying to convince Dave Lilburn and Jim Savage to let me do a book and correct all the inaccuracies. Because Arthur Whitten Brown never climbed on the wings. If he did, he would have gone through them. And if you're ever in London with nothing to do, go to the Science Museum and put your hands on the wings of the plane. And anybody who has a fear of flying, your fear will be cured instantly. Because if you can fly in that, you can fly. So this will be the last song Dave Lilburn heard me sing. Because this is the song I sang at the lunch. I can remember. Will you hold the keys? Now, it's funny that for the last 2 years of COVID, I sat in the back garden singing to the birds. And it's really easy to sing to birds.
No river wider than a mile, crossing you in style someday. You heartbreaker, dream maker, wherever you're going, I'm going your way. Two drifters off to see the world. There's such a lot of world to see, where after the same rain goes in, waiting round the bend, my Huckleberry friend, river and me. Is it like this? Orchestra. Do, 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 do. We're after the same rainbow's end, waiting round the bend. Huckleberry friend, river and me. I call it, this one is called Stone Town Terrace. I'm going to Limerick to meet Dave. Limerick, the Shannon, across Sarsfield Bridge, left onto O'Callaghan Strand, and soft right onto Stone Town Terrace. Then a bit of dodgy parking up on the path. The neighbour doesn't mind. Dave, expecting me, comes to the gate in the wall garden to greet me with welcome, and we'll have tea before we start work. So I sit in the sun, admiring Dave's studio, his shed, his gallery, his shack, his print room, his cabin, his museum, his outhouse, his print works, his map room, his ink room, his workroom, his factory, his exhibition space, his chamber, his salon, his chapel, his shelter, his shelter, his shelter. In minutes, he's back with the tea and Romany, his love, his life, his art. I'm watching the little film about Dave. When he was doing the inky thing, that was your kitchen.
No, I wasn't there.
He had a sink and I should have said it's not his kitchen. What was it?
It was the kitchen in Mary I.
It was an old domestic science room in Mary Ann that was turned into a print studio.
That's the art world. There's so many people involved. It's not like. So anyway, and this is the one I've been working on. I need the glasses for this. This is called The Printmaker and the Poet. Let me take you back. It was an ordinary, bright June morning. Dave and I were walking the old bog road. The mountain, the sky, and the bog ignoring us, getting on with their day. And Dave, like a venerable master talking to his disciples, says, "This is where Buddhists come for balance, a block of air on each shoulder, walking into the light." And I had to ask, are we Buddhists, Dave? Are we balanced? Do we have a block of air on each shoulder? And are we walking in the right direction? No, he said. We are wanderers, searchers, pioneers, I said. Like Alcock and Brown, who landed their plane somewhere out there. That's it, said Dave. Dreamers, drifters, huckleberry friends, I said, and began singing. Two drifters off to see the world, the hills and clouds of Connemara. We wandered on for a while in a bird-song silence, until I said, "Speaking of dreamers, poets say fiddlers and pipers come to Connemara to steal tunes from the air, from the sound the wind makes moving over the island and the mountains, or through the holes in the stone wall, the rushes by the water's edge. Once you've heard its lonely sigh, it's a music you will never forget. I'd go so far as to say its enchantment has the handmade touch of the printmaker." That was 3 years ago this week. Sadly, with Dave gone, everything has changed.
I now know Connemara is where the souls of painters and printmakers go to lay down their brushes, their pencils, to release their light back into the air. Lord only knows how they do this, but the old books say it is always at night. Their light so pure, it only comes true in stars. Of all the money e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and all ever I had, alas, it was to none but me. And all I have done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall, so fill to me parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Of all the friends ever I had, they're sorry for my going away, and all the sweethearts ever I had, they'd wish me one more day to stay. But as it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I will gently rise, softly call. Good night and joy be with you all. Thank you.
For the poetry,
It's been a great joy for you to be here with Ciaran and Judith and Emily.
It was just wonderful. Also, not to mention hearing your new poems and the special ones for Dave, which are real, particularly we're very grateful for, and we look forward to seeing them in print and tempo and music.
If you will take the introduction of the invitation.
That brings us to the end of this evening, and I would like to thank everybody involved who helped make this evening possible. Firstly, thanks to Romany for her unflagging encouragement throughout the preparation for this evening, and we're still doing okay. How is it? She said, yeah, no, I trust whatever you do, it'll be fine, you know. And that was really what really gave the whole event buoyance and a momentum. But really, you could also say that it got its momentum from the goodwill and the generosity of all the participants involved. I mean, there was an immediacy. All of that really bears out the kind of love, affection and esteem that we all held Dave in. So he's with us in spirit, in song, in poetry, and in his lovely art that's around him here. And we will have that, we'll always have that to remember him with, The other person who hung the exhibition, whom I have to thank, is Courtney Callaghan, who did such a brilliant job with her expert eye and her perfectionism, and she was ably assisted, I'm told, by Brian and Joe, and I quote herself as saying they were a fantastic help and great fun as well. So thank you to and I also want to thank Julian, who was here this evening and who helped put our programme together, who helped in all the recording, the visuals and everything. So thank you very much, Julian, for coming down especially for this today. And also I have to thank my other members of the committee, Vivian and Marie, whose stamina and support and getting everything together throughout it has just been great, and Ella, who is really a magician in putting everything together. So, thank you.
Could I say something?
Of course.
I wasn't going to do it.
Romany, you can do it.
Thank you. I didn't know when we were going to be told that you were going to do this for me that it would be so absolutely amazing. It is almost a year now that they didn't hear anymore that he died, and so he's not here anymore. Somebody said to me, he said, but he will be always there because you have all his art, and it's true, but I think today you all brought him back again to me, and all the different aspects for Dave. In my house, I have all different photos. I can't have one photo. I can't capture Dave in one image. You know, he's singing, he's dancing, he's playing, he's making noise, he's painting, he's doing everything. And I felt that today, that you gave me that as well, that Dave, you know. And I'm very moved by it. It was absolutely amazing. So thank you.
It's been great, as I said, having Roman, guiding us throughout this has been very good, and it was essentially, it's Dave, I think, that helped also in a way to pull so many unusual things together that just so happened in a random, serendipitous way that we couldn't even have imagined, you know. So, so thank you everybody. Gurmil Magib and Slán Galéir.